Hello everybody. In today's video, we are taking a diversion and looking at something that's powered not by electricity, but by hydrocarbons. This is a Coleman lantern, model 220K, made in 1982. If you're not a subscriber of my channel and you came across this video on happenstance, unless you are completely unknowledgeable about Coleman lanterns, you will probably not like the pace of this video. I make these videos for my subscribers, so it's going to go at a pace that you're probably not going to enjoy if you already know stuff about Coleman lanterns, so you might just want to turn this video off. I just want to get that out of the way for any strangers that might be watching. It may seem odd that someone like me would want a Coleman lantern, but actually I have an interest in fuel-powered lighting, just like I do in electric-powered lighting. Actually, it was about 4 or 5 years ago that I bought my first oil lamp. It was just a teeny little oil lamp. I saw it at a Goodwill store. Very cheap thing, but I still have it and it works just fine. Just a tiny little oil lamp with a tiny little wick that basically put out the equivalent light of a candle. And from there I bought a couple of more small oil lamps. Then I bought a large oil lamp. Then I bought an Aladdin lamp, and that thing's worthy of its own video that I'll do at some point. And ever since I've gotten the Aladdin lamp, I've wanted to get a Coleman lantern. It just took a couple of years since getting the Aladdin lamp that I finally got one. And how I found this one was, I was at the local antique store, a place I haven't been in 4 or 5 years. I was there with a friend, and I was looking around there, and I saw this thing in the store. It was in the box. It had a $75 price tag on it, which was honestly a bit more than I was than I thought it was worth. But as you can see, it's in such good shape, and it's in the box, and we will look at the box. And it was the only Coleman lantern there. I decided to buy it, and now I'm glad I did. So this thing, if you don't know what these are, because they are certainly not as common anymore as they were in decades past. These are pressure lanterns. They run on a liquid fuel that is basically old-fashioned gasoline. And what I mean by old-fashioned gasoline, it is basically the formula of that gasoline was like 70 to 80 years ago. Very low octane, and it has no additives in it. You couldn't run it in your car. You might possibly get away with running it in something like a small flathead engine, like a push mower engine, or possibly in an antique car. You wouldn't want to run it in a modern car though, but that's pretty much what it is. That's what these run on. And you pump them full of air and generate air pressure inside them. Part of this fuel tank, also known as the fount, it's got a little space in it where air is pressurized. And when you open the fuel valve, a mixture of fuel being pushed by that pressurized air, the mixture of fuel and air goes up this little thin tube in the center, which is called the generator, and ultimately goes down these two thicker tubes at the sides, where it makes contact with these two round white things that kind of look like fabric. Those are the mantles. And that's sort of where the magic of both Coleman lanterns and Aladdin lanterns is. You can actually think of these as incandescent lamps, because the whole point of them is the flame itself does not generate the light, and as a matter of fact, when these are running the way they should, they barely produce a visible flame at all. The purpose of these is to produce such a clean burning flame that it's just a dull blue. But because it's burning very efficiently, that flame is also very, very hot, which is why it's blue. And it's the heat that causes these mantles to glow, and they glow a very bright white, or in modern mantles, a very bright yellow, but still similar to an incandescent light bulb nonetheless. And they incandesce, and that's where your light comes from, is the mantles incandescing from the heat. Coleman lanterns are very efficient. They burn the fuel, for the light they produce, they burn the fuel much more efficiently than a normal oil lamp does that just uses a wick and a flame to generate the light. But also the mantles act as sort of a catalytic converter. Because they are glowing white hot, any unburnt fuel that contacts them gets instantly burned. And as a result of that, Coleman lanterns, when they're running right, they don't smoke. They also don't smell. They only produce a very faint smell, not unlike the exhaust of a car, but it's very, very faint. These are environmentally much nicer to be around than an old-fashioned, wick lantern. The large YouTuber Technology Connections, whose videos are always great, he did a video about Coleman lanterns. He did an entire series on oil lamps, going from the basic wick-based oil lamps to Aladdin lanterns, and then to Coleman lanterns and similar pressure lamps, gas pressure lamps. It's a fantastic video, and then he did a follow-up on his second channel, Technology Connextras, that digs a bit further into the Coleman lanterns. They're both great videos. I recommend them. They almost preclude my need to make this video, but I'm making it anyway because I want to show this thing off. So Coleman lanterns go back over a century, and actually the earliest models, some of the earliest models, were table lamps rather than lanterns like this, but they all worked on the same principle. This model, the 220K, was the final revision of the long-lived and very popular 220 series of lanterns. The 220K was produced from, I believe, 1979 to 1983. The first model in the series, the 220B, was introduced in 1930, and the design was mostly the same as this, so it really shows you how far back these things go and how little they've changed over time. So, let's start by taking a look at the box, actually. Because the box is great. It's pretty cool. Here it is. Coleman lantern, 2-mantle model 220. Because it's got two mantles, Coleman made single mantle lanterns and dual mantle lanterns. The 2-mantle lanterns are more common. And it was originally sold by a store called Afes for $26.95, factored for inflation since 1982. That's about $80 in today's money. And then below that $26.95 price tag is a $75 price tag that some dumbass paid for it at a antique store. So, see what we got here. Built-in quality, Coleman long life generator for high efficiency and durability. 2 silk light mantles for peak light output. Rust resistant inner coated fuel tank. Only 6 inches diameter at base and 13 7/8 inches high. Fits Coleman carrying case. Full quart capacity fuel tank provides up to 8 hours of light from one filling of Coleman fuel. Costs only pennies per day. Full line of accessories for real camping convenience. And here we go. A bit more of an introduction. The lantern that's a legend, famous for over 75 years worldwide, and it's even more popular today for camping, fishing, and all outdoor activities, plus emergency standby lighting. Powerful, spreads a 100-foot circle of brilliant light. Simple, exclusive Coleman finger pump pressure system. Lantern operating instructions permanently printed on metal collar. Weather resistant, sturdy construction, keeps a wind and rain. Stormproof globe, resists breakage, even in a rainstorm. And they apparently trademarked stormproof, which is a little odd. And then the back. Coleman, the greatest name in the great outdoors. The great outdoors, your heritage and the heritage of future generations. Take care of it. Oh, that's nice. For the outdoors, Coleman lanterns, camp stoves, coolers, jugs, catalytic heaters, tents, sleeping bags, backpacking equipment, and camping trailers. Hobie Cat sailboats and Crossman pellet and BB guns. Man, they were a diverse company. Although I've heard that the Coleman camping trailers are, at least today, they're garbage. They're just outsourced and built very poorly. For recreational vehicles, Coleman heating and air conditioning equipment, cooking appliances, and water systems. For homes everywhere, Coleman quality heating and air conditioning systems. Again, what a diverse company. You got a 1-year warranty, which kind of sucks. Today, Coleman actually gives you a 5-year warranty, but back when this lantern was made, these were a commodity item. I mean, $26.95, $80 adjusted for inflation. The equivalent lantern today from Coleman is, I believe, $115 US. And it's like almost $200 in Canada. So they're not as much of a commodity anymore. So it's good that today they give you a longer warranty. And then the optional accessories: carrying case, part storage kit, floodlight reflector, fuel filler, lantern hanger. None of which I have. So there's the box. So yeah, this is the classic Coleman lantern that runs on Coleman's liquid fuel that's somewhat similar to gasoline. But Coleman made and today makes lanterns based on the same principle that run on other fuels. Actually, most of the lanterns they make today actually run on propane. The old liquid fuel lanterns like this one, they're not as much the norm anymore. Coleman focuses mostly on the propane lanterns. Of course, propane's easier to use, less risk of spills, safer to use indoors or in other delicate environments, stuff like that. So they're actually focusing on the propane lanterns today. But they still do make some liquid fuel lanterns. The liquid fuel lanterns they make today, at least the US models, they call them dual fuel, and they'll actually run on either Coleman fuel or regular unleaded gasoline, like automotive gasoline, which is kind of funny. So if you were in a pinch, wanted to use your Coleman lantern, but didn't have Coleman fuel on you, you can run it on gasoline. Gasoline's apparently stinkier, and there's more chance of gumming up the generator, and then you have to clean or replace the generator. But they will do it, which is kind of funny. And then Coleman actually still makes lanterns of this type that run on kerosene, and they are a wild animal because they're very hard to use. Like this one, you just turn the fuel on, stick a lit match in there, and it lights off. The kerosene ones, because kerosene doesn't so readily vaporize, because these things depend on the fuel vaporizing and mixing with the air. The kerosene ones, they actually have a little dish inside them that you have to fill with alcohol, like isopropyl alcohol, light that on fire, and then sit and let the alcohol burn for like 10 minutes. It warms up the generator, and then after that 10 minutes or so, then you can light it. So they are a bit of a monster to deal with compared to lanterns like this one, but where they're kerosene, they're once again a bit safer to deal with, just like the propane ones. But the classic Coleman are the liquid fuel ones, like this one. By liquid fuel, I'm talking about Coleman fuel. So, aside from just thinking they're cool, there's actually a bit of a sentimental value to me having this lantern. In my entire life, there was only one instance I ever saw a Coleman lantern in use, and it was my dad's Coleman lantern. He had one, and he used it once in my entire life. It was during the ice storm of 1998. I do remember it. I was 3 years old. Shout out to my 30 and over Eastern Canadians and Northeastern US viewers. Yeah, the ice storm of 98 hit. We lost power for 3 days. And my dad lit up his Coleman lantern. We used it inside. It helped heat the house. It did a great job lighting the house. And I just remember it being on the floor in the dining room, and my dad and I huddled around it. And I remember just being mesmerized by the bright white light that emanated from it. And that was the only time I ever saw that lantern used. I don't know what that lantern was anymore. My best guess was that it was a model 286 or 286A. But yeah, it's kind of sentimental, and unfortunately, I had the chance to get that lantern after my dad passed away, and we were clearing out his house. I didn't take it. I just didn't see the value at the time, but hindsight and all that. But yeah, it's another reason I'm really glad to have one of these. There's kind of a romanticism that comes with them. Fuel powered lanterns like this, they're just not nearly as common anymore. They don't make as much sense anymore as they used to. LEDs have come so far in the past couple of decades that LED lanterns that run on batteries for dozens, if not hundreds of hours, so much cheaper to use, so much safer to use. You can use them indoors without any concerns, obviously. They're just a way to go now, although people will argue, and they are right, that fuel-powered lanterns like this still have their place, particularly in the winter, because of the heat they produce. And these do produce. This lantern running full tilt probably produces around 1,000 watts, equivalent of heat. So they do have their use. So they're not a bad thing to have around at all if you need it. So the mantles themselves are a bit of a discussion point. Now, I talk about my dad's lantern we used during the ice storm of '98. It put out this brilliant, bright white light. But if you light a Coleman lantern today that has mantles on it that were made in the past 30 years or so, they're actually quite yellowish. They're more like an incandescent light bulb and less like the bright white mantles of old. And that's because in the early 1990s, Coleman actually changed the formulation of their mantles. The old mantles contained thorium, which is a chemical that's radioactive, which is fun. And because of obvious concerns around that, in the early 1990s, they stopped using thorium to make the mantles. They are today made with yttrium, which is a similarly toxic but no longer radioactive chemical. And the side effect of that is the modern yttrium mantles, they burn a bit more yellow. And we'll see that when we light the lantern up. It's still a lovely, bright light, but it is no longer quite the neutral white that it was in the mantles of old. It's a bit more yellow now. And Coleman lantern enthusiasts, this is a point of contention for them. They really want the older thorium-based mantles, and actually I want to get some thorium-based mantles just to try them out. The mantles I have here, I bought when I got this lantern. This lantern had mantles on it, but they had holes in them, so I replaced them. It's not good to run these with damaged mantles. You risk having uneven heat distribution and could crack the globe or cause other damage. So these are new Coleman number 21 mantles that I bought at Canadian Tire. I think it was about $6 or $7 for the pair, which is one of the many reasons I like these way more than I like my Aladdin lantern. You want to buy a new mantle for an Aladdin lamp? It's something like $50 after shipping. For Coleman lanterns, I just walk into my nearest hardware store and get a pair of them for $6, $7, which is pretty nice. And that's just because these are just so much more common than the Aladdin lamps. And while Coleman doesn't make mantles with thorium anymore, there is at least one other company that does make mantles with thorium. They're called Peerless, and Peerless actually makes mantles of both types, and it's never obvious whether you're going to get thorium mantles or yttrium mantles. So you kind of have to go by which distributor you buy them from. Some distributors buy the thoriated peerless mantles, and then other distributors buy the yttrium peerless mantles. For example, Old Coleman parts, which is probably the premier source of old Coleman parts, they sell the thoriated mantles. But I would like to buy some someday. I'll probably go on eBay and just buy some Coleman brand, some, new old stock Coleman brand mantles, because I would like to experience the bright white light of thoriated mantles. But yeah, overall, Coleman lamp, at least in my experience so far, these are so much less of a hassle to deal with than the Aladdin lamps. Of course, I'll make a video about my Aladdin lamp. If you don't know what they are, Technology Connections has a video all about them. But compared to Aladdin lamps, these just seem to be way less hassle to deal with. Aladdin lamps can be very cantankerous. You have to monitor them constantly, unless you run the risk of a runaway condition, which is very scary. These don't really do that unless something goes seriously wrong inside them. You should always monitor Coleman lanterns constantly too. You're freaking running a gasoline-powered lantern. But they're just way more stable than Aladdin lamps, and all the parts are cheaper, and you can buy a new one for $100 US versus several $100 for an Aladdin lamp. And these and the Aladdin lamps, they do the same thing, and the Aladdin lamps are technically safer because they run on kerosene, but these are just way nicer to deal with. At least in my opinion, and they give you the exact same quality of light, which is nice. And actually even better quality of light, at least than my Aladdin lantern. Aladdin lamps, they are very, it's very hard to make them run perfectly. Coleman lanterns, they are generally quite easy to keep running perfectly. As far as I know anyway, I'm not exactly an expert on these things. So, looking at the lantern itself, as you can see, it's in great shape. The paint is lovely. The logo on here is lovely. Everything is just in perfect shape. It was definitely used, even though it was in the box, but it may not have been used much, and it was definitely well cared for. It's a really nice unit. Starting down here, this is your fuel cap. Oh, it still had a little bit of pressure in it. So this is where you fill your fuel tank with Coleman fuel. And because the whole way these run is under pressure, you pump air pressure into them, it's really important, especially when you're dealing with vintage lanterns like this one, that all the seals are good. Everything in here has to be sealed, and if there's anything leaking, it could be a dangerous situation just because of the volatility of the fuel. So for example, the fuel cap here, you can see has a rubber gasket. This fuel cap seems to be holding pressure just fine. This whole lantern doesn't appear to have any leaks. Before I started taping this video, I had last used it maybe 2 weeks ago, and I let out the pressure before I started taping here. It had tons of pressure in it still from when I last pumped it up. So there's obviously no leaks in this lantern. This lantern's in very good shape. But some of the vintage Coleman lantern resources, they will recommend that any Coleman lantern, no matter how good a shape it is, you should always replace the fuel cap. I'm using my own discretion. It appears to not be leaking, so I'm content continuing to use this fuel cap. And then you've got your air pump here. What you do is you turn it counterclockwise a full turn or more to loosen it, and you cover the little hole with your thumb, and you give it a bunch of pumps, like 20 pumps or so, and then it's pressurized. And then you close it, and there's a little check valve at the bottom of this pump, and so that's what keeps the pressure inside the fuel tank. that check valve is something that can sometimes go bad on these. Um, Sometimes it can be a bit of an ordeal to change out the check valve. You can buy new check valves. You can buy new parts for most of these Coleman lanterns. And actually, when I got this lantern, um, it would not build pressure. I would just pump and pump, and it would not build pressure at all. And I thought it was the check valve. And so I did a little trick that you can do to possibly revive a check valve, and that's by emptying all the fuel out of the lantern, uh, tilting it on its side so that the pump faces upwards, and then removing the pump, and then pouring a bit of vinegar down in so it contacts the check valve, and just letting it sit for a few hours or overnight or whatever. So I did that. Found out that it still wouldn't hold pressure. I was worried that I might need a new check valve, and the check valves are very hard to remove without accidentally destroying unless you own the proper tool. But then I realized that the real reason I couldn't build pressure is just because the rubber gasket that pushes the air past the check valve, it just needed to be oiled. If you look right here, it says oil, and you're supposed to put a couple of drops of 3-in-1 oil in this little hole, and that oil wets the rubber gasket that sits at the bottom of this pump arm, and then that way it's able to seal. That rubber gasket can seal around the walls of the pump chamber, and that was all that was wrong with this, is it wasn't sealing, so it wasn't actually pumping any air. But now that I've done that, it works just fine. And just from the pumps that I did there, if I loosen the fuel cap, you can hear that we did build a little bit of pressure. There's your fuel valve right here. It says on it, turn a quarter turn to light. So you turn it a quarter, you light a match, stick your match in there, turn it a quarter of the way. Liquid fuel spits out of the generator. Your match ignites the fuel, and then the heat generated by that igniting fuel causes the mantles to warm up, which then warms up the generator, and then the heat from the generator getting hot allows the fuel to vaporize properly, and the lantern starts running normally. After mantles burn bright, open all the way. Made in USA, and yes, this was made in the USA, which is nice. Gives you the model number for the generator if you ever have to replace it. And there's the instructions there. I will not read these in full. You can pause and read them if you want. And then newer Coleman lanterns don't have this. This one does, and that's the cleaning lever. So sometimes debris can get caught in the generator and cause the fuel and air to not flow correctly, usually signaled by the mantles not burning very brightly. And so this cleaning lever, when you turn it, it lifts and lowers a tiny little pricker, like almost like the singular wire of a wire brush, and it pricks it through the jet that the fuel and air goes through, and that just cleans it. So you're supposed to routinely use the cleaning lever every time you light the lantern, and then just spin it as necessary, and always have it pointing down for the normal run condition. And I'll let you read this. And this warning's important. Never loosen fuel cap or fill tank near flame, pilot lights, or while lantern is hot. And that's very important indeed. Here's what a gallon container of Coleman fuel looks like, also known as camp fuel or white gas or naphtha. This is the stuff you run Coleman lanterns on, and other Coleman appliances. You can see there illustrated is a Coleman stove, and I'd like to get a Coleman stove someday. I have multiple times in just the past couple of years been caught in a long, prolonged power outage, and wish I was able to cook food. So yeah, maybe someday I'll get one of those. But yeah, Coleman makes stoves that run on liquid fuel as well as other stoves that run on propane. Um, uh, Coleman used to make what were called catalytic heaters that ran on Coleman fuel, and they quit making those in the 80s. I guess they were very unsafe or very noxious to use, or something. But they basically had a catalytic converter in them, and it catalyzed the vaporized fuel and got hot and generated heat. But there you go. So Coleman's the main seller of this stuff. You can find it under one or two generic brands, I think, but I think Coleman for the most part has like a patent on this stuff, so you don't really see generic stuff. I bought this at Canadian Tire. I paid $30 for this gallon of fuel. It is certainly, it must be way more expensive today than it used to be. It was quite expensive, but a 1 gallon jug will fill a lantern, I think 4 times, if not 5. So 8, let's say 4 times 8, 32 hours of use for $30. Still hellishly more expensive than just a battery lantern. But if you need something, if you don't have electricity or batteries available, and or you need heat, this is actually much cheaper than propane is. So this is actually more economical than the propane powered Coleman lanterns. So I'll show you how this comes apart. You turn this little nut up here, and it comes off, and then its little hat, which is called the ventilator, it comes off. And then you can take the globe off. I should show the globe. It was made by Pyrex for Coleman, made in the USA. And there you have access to your mantles. The mantles are, I guess you could call them a consumable item. If you take really good care of the lantern and it doesn't get jostled around too much, the mantles can last years or decades. But generally, you can consider the mantles a consumable item. They will often get, broken in transportation. They'll get holes in them. They're incredibly delicate. If I so much as touch these or blow on them or something, I will destroy them. They are extremely delicate. When you buy them, and I don't have a Coleman brand mantle here, but I do have this Canadian Tire store brand mantle. When you buy them, they are a very soft, pliable fabric. And you can see they have little strings on them, and they almost always come as pairs. And you tie the little string around a indentation on the tube there, and you tie the mantles on. Although Coleman also makes mantles that instead of having to tie the string, they just come with a little spring clip you can put on. So you tie your soft fabric-y mantle on, and then you burn it. You take a match to it and you burn the burn the mantle itself, not with fuel. Keep the lantern itself turned off, and just use the match to burn the mantle directly. And when the mantle burns, it turns into this extremely delicate ash substance, and then it's actually ready to do its job. And you can't touch them. They're extremely delicate. Well, with all that being said, how about we go over to the stove, just so I'm under the range hood, and let's light this thing up. Alright, let's light this thing up. So I'm on my stove here, so I'm under the range hood. When we go to light this up, or before we light it up, I'll turn the fan on here. And I'm doing that because, although, as I spoke earlier, these things burn very cleanly and with quite minimal odor, they are very smoky when you first light them up. They're actually very flamey too. Sometimes flames will actually exit the ventilator here. And that happens because when you first light them off, the lantern's cold, the generator's cold, and the fuel doesn't want to vaporize. So you have raw liquid fuel squirting into the chamber here, and it's very flamey as a result. But after a few seconds of that flaminess, and the generator warms up and the fuel starts vaporizing, then it stops smoking, stops flaming, the mantles glow brightly, and it burns cleanly thereafter. Now, Coleman says you shouldn't run these indoors. Everybody, almost everybody says you shouldn't run these indoors, and I actually agree with that. Even if I don't obey it rather. I've run this thing indoors. I've lit it indoors. When I first tested this thing, I did it. You better believe I did it outside, and actually I ran it quite extensively outdoors before I came to trust it and was comfortable running it indoors. But you shouldn't run these indoors. But people do, and I probably will continue to. At the very least, light them outdoors and then carry them indoors. They're meant to be carried. You know, you can carry these things around. They can even be tilted slightly while they're running, and it's not going to hurt them. They were meant to be carried around while running. So yeah, at the very least, light it outdoors, then bring it inside. I have the window open, like anything that burns hydrocarbons. It consumes oxygen. It produces carbon monoxide, albeit small amounts. And yeah, do not ever run these in a sealed environment. So I've got the window wide open, and before we light this off, I'm going to turn the stove fan on. So first we pressurize. I'm just going to go for 10 pumps. Normally you would do 20 to 30. And I'll strike a match here. I was going to use a lighter, but I'll use a match for the full vintage experience. And turn the valve on. There we go. Oh, almost. And we're not lighting. Why is that? Oh. That's interesting. We're spitting fuel, but it's mostly just air coming out, so it's not lighting. That's interesting. Why is that happening? I'll pump it up a bit more. I assume I've built enough pressure. Maybe I haven't. There we go. Oh. Now we're talking. There we go. Uh-oh. Turn the cleaning lever. Alright. And we're running. I think it just had some air in the generator. I think it just took a bit for some liquid fuel to get in there. And away she goes. It's not necessary, but often they'll tell you to pump it up a bit more after you light it. Fuel valve's open. Now the fuel valve's open all the way. And there you go. I forgot to mention I do have a fire extinguisher right beside me just in case something terrible happened. That is a must if you're going to use these or any fuel-powered appliance. Always have a fire extinguisher with you. But we're running, and actually I'll turn the light off here. As you can see, it's pretty darn bright. You can also hear, probably, It's making quite the hissing sound. And that's one advantage that Aladdin lanterns have over the Coleman lanterns. The Aladdin lanterns, or lamps really, they're table lamps. The Aladdin lamps are silent, or at least they're silent when they're running correctly. Mine is slightly less than silent because it does not run perfectly. The Coleman lamps are quite noisy. Apparently the propane ones are really noisy. The liquid fuel ones, I mean, I can hear it, but it's not intrusive at all. Now I'll turn the I'll turn both the overhead lights off here. And I'll turn this light off and close that. And there you go. We are lit entirely by the Coleman lantern. And if I just bring it over here, you can see how much it lights everything up. It's quite impressive. I haven't done a comparison to see what electric equivalent this is equivalent to. My guess would be at least a 60-watt incandescent bulb. I've seen a couple of people say closer to a 100-watt incandescent bulb. Either way, these things are very, very bright. And the camera's probably adjusted, but it is a little on the yellowish side. Now, because of course it's consuming the pressurized air inside the fuel tank, you do have to periodically pump these up. I had read initially that maybe every half hour or so you have to pump them up. I mean, I've run this lantern as long as 2 hours without pumping it up. So it definitely depends on the lantern and depends on the condition of the lantern. Like I said, this one seems to hold pressure perfectly. So I generally just light it and I don't pressurize it again until I light it the next time. But yeah, there's definitely a romantic quality to this that you just can't get from a electrically powered lantern. It really is nice, but also it really does produce a lot of heat. And we're in summer right now, and me being indoors, which again you should not do, it would warm this place up quite quickly if I were to leave it going here. But I love it. I love just watching this thing and listening to it. It really is quite a pleasant thing to be around, at least in my opinion. And there's almost no smell. Like, there's so much less smell than a normal wick-based kerosene lamp, and even an Aladdin lamp. It's really quite impressive. Now, one big downside of the vintage Coleman lanterns versus the newer ones is you cannot adjust the light output. Technically, you can't. There's no way to adjust the light output. Newer lanterns, you actually use the fuel knob to adjust the light output. These older ones, they run at full blast all the time. Now, with that said, there are a couple of backdoor methods to reduce the light output, because this does produce a lot of light. One way to reduce the light output is actually by using the cleaning lever. Recall I said before that you're supposed to leave the cleaning lever in the pointing downward for normal operation. Well, if I start spinning it upwards here, you can see it does reduce the light output. And that's because the little pricker that cleans the fuel orifice, it's getting in the way of the fuel and air mixture. But as you can see, it's pretty hard to regulate. It wants to depending on where you have it, it either wants to slowly get brighter and brighter or slowly get dimmer and dimmer. And also, some people say that it does damage the cleaner over time if you do this, although other people say they've been doing it for decades and have never had to replace a generator as a result of it. So it's, it could be either or. But it is hard to do, and I find on this lantern I haven't been able to do it and leave it alone. I always have to tend to it. Now the other way to reduce the light output of these is to reduce the pressure, or just run them at a lower pressure. This is not something you can do on the fly. If I wanted to do this, I would have to shut the lantern down, wait for it all to cool down, which, you know, half an hour or more, turn the fuel cap to release the pressure, and then pump it up, but with fewer pumps. I have found that with as few as 3 pumps, this lantern will start and run. However, I have found with this particular lantern, and it's normal for these lanterns to do this, if the pressure gets too low, they start pulsing. The light starts pulsing, and it's quite aggravating. I've got a little clip here I'll show you. But yeah, usually some of these lanterns, they'll run stably at a reduced pressure, but I think most of them, including this one, they won't. So for that reason, really the only way to reasonably run these is on full tilt, which is how Coleman designed them to be run. So you wouldn't want to run something like this at a night light or something, or to light up a small space. This is really something you would use to light up an entire campsite, and it does a fantastic job at doing that. So we'll turn the lights back on here, and we'll shut her down. So to shut her down, just close the fuel knob. And it'll take a minute or two for it to stop burning. You can see it's already dimming as the fuel and air supply begins to be cut off. One time I went to shut this thing off, it took 20 minutes to shut completely off, and you can see it's gonna pulse and flicker and do all manner of other things. That's just normal for these. Wow, that shut off really quickly. That's the fastest I've ever seen this thing shut off, actually. It's a little concerning. I'm still scared that there's possibly raw fuel vapor coming out. Normally what you would see is a minute or two of just the mantles really dimly glowing as the last of the fuel-air mixture goes through. And you'll see like a little circular flame inside the mantles, and sometimes, you know, it'll look like it's about to shut off, and then it'll suddenly flare up and run for a few more seconds, and that's just normal for these. One time I shut this thing off and it took 20 minutes to completely stop burning. That's not normal. That's often a sign of a fuel valve that's not working correctly, but for in the case of this lantern, I think the needle in the fuel valve that cuts off the fuel and airflow, I think that needle just didn't seat correctly, or maybe there was a piece of dirt in it, because it's the only time that ever does that. Normally this shuts off within a couple of minutes, but we just watched it shut off within, like, what was that, like 20 seconds on video? That's actually a little scary. I can smell a little bit of raw fuel, so there is enough heat that there's still a little bit of fuel coming out. That was a very quick shut off. But I'll just leave it be, let it cool down. If I was more daring, I could take a lighter and light any residual fuel vapor, but I'll just leave it under the fan here, and we're done. We've run a Coleman lantern. Alright, I think I'm gonna stop here. That's all there is to show of the Coleman Model 220K gas mantle lantern from 1982. I really love this thing. My first Coleman lantern. I've always wanted to have one and experience one for the first time in the vast majority of my life. Yeah, I'm really glad to have this. It's very cool, and I've had a lot of fun using it. So you might be surprised when I tell you that I don't think I'm going to keep this. I'm actually planning on selling it, and that's because I've already gone on eBay, bought another Coleman lantern of a different type, and for several reasons, I really like that lantern more than I like this one. I like using both of them, but the one I bought after getting this one, I find it a lot nicer to use for several reasons. So I will show you that lantern in another video. And this one I'm probably just going to throw up on eBay and probably not be able to get back what I paid for it, but at least I'll try. And yeah, that's it. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.